praise are upon us, and again, I want you to be very intentional these days. Maybe to the point that you instill within yourself a new habit of thankfulness. That it's not just a month out of the year, but it's just a common element of your day. But today we're going to ask the question, where did our joy go? Where did our joy go? And so you can already move ahead to Psalm 51, but I'm going to tell you a story before we get there. I'm going to ask this question, and I'll be able to tell a little about your personality when you answer this by your raising of your hand. Have you ever gotten the air knocked out of you? Well, evidently we attract that type of person. A lot of you have raised your hands. Ever get the air knocked out of you? I was in grade school, probably about 4th grade. And my friend Timmy, you've heard me tell sometimes the story of Timmy in my life. Timmy and I had just watched a video at grade school about Evel Knievel. Do you guys remember Evel Knievel? How many of you remember Evel Knievel? All right. So they showed a clip of him jumping over 19 cars at the Houston Astrodome in front of 100,000 people cheering him on to jump over these 19 cars. And they showed that in school. I don't know if it's because of Timmy and I that they stopped showing clips like that, but they probably don't show clips like Evel Knievel so much in school. You probably have gotten wiser since then. But we had watched that, and Tim and I thought we should try to do something similar. The glory that we saw in Evel Knievel. In that cape, red, white, and blue, and that motorcycle, he is just tremendous. So we had our bicycles, we had them out at the farm, my farmhouse, my parents' farmhouse, and we created a ramp. And we worked all day long on this ramp. We were going to go for a 6-foot ramp. But try as we might, we could get not enough pedaling speed to jump off a 6-foot ramp. We would make it to the top, get your front wheel over it, and just kind of tumble off the end. Wasn't near as glamorous as we thought it should be. So we shortened that to a 4-foot ramp. We found at 4 foot, you could keep your speed up, and you could really sail off a 4-foot ramp. And by the time we got all that assembled and had practiced a couple times, enough to learn how to land on our wheels instead of on our heads, which takes trial and effort, trial and error there. We started bringing barrels out. We had a bunch of those 55-gallon oil drum barrels behind the round top. So we started rolling those out. By the way, those are heavy, hard to move for 4th graders. Took us the better part of the day to start getting them lined up. We were going to do a number of barrels, but they were so heavy, we thought that 6 would be appropriate. So we had 6. And we were losing daylight by this time. So we didn't start with 1 barrel, decide we could go to 2. We decided to just cut out all the in-between stages in the work up to it stage. We just went to the full 6 barrels and said, surely we can make that. It was at this point that as we're moving barrels that Timmy says, Al, I think I hurt my hand. I won't be able to ride my bicycle like this. Scott, it's all on you. Now looking back at this, I got to tell you, I think he was faking it. But I took on that mantle. I'm the only one left to be able to jump this. And I took my bicycle back to the other end of the court there and lined up. And I'm steeling myself up for this. And I'm envisioning Evel Knievel. And I'm thinking when we get this accomplished, we're going to start inviting all of our friends after school to come watch this. And it's going to be glorious. But we better learn how to land on 2 wheels first. So I start pedaling. And I start pedaling like my life depended on it, which, by the way, probably did. And I pedaled and I hit that ramp. And I hit it hard. I hit it like a hurricane. And I went up that ramp and I came off that top and I pulled up just a little, to get that wheel up. And I'm sailing. I cross over 1, 2, 3. I sailed over 4 barrels. You hear my problem. There are 6 barrels. My bicycle landed on barrel 4. I landed on 5 and 6 as I went sailing over my handlebars. And I hit 5 and 6 and rolled over off the side. Totally knocked the air out of me. And I'm just laying there just gasping for breath. Timmy runs over. And he says this. "Oh man, you'll get it next time." That was his response. And I remember thinking, there ain't going to be a next time. And about that time, we hear Mom's voice ring out, "Time for dinner!" And I was literally saved by the bell. It's literally saved by the bell. So Timmy and I went back in, and we had dinner. And that was all we ever did with that ramp. And I remember, though, getting the air knocked out of me that day. And if you remember getting the air knocked out of you, remember, I could probably hold my breath for almost 2 minutes when I was in 4th grade because we worked hard on that type of thing. It was competition at school. But when you can't breathe and you want to breathe and it's been a minute, it's a whole different ball game, and you're just kind of desperate for air. And you're trying to arch your back and trying to do whatever you can. And Timmy's up there and he's like, "Let's go get dinner," and I'm trying to breathe. And I thought, that's when you want to breathe more. And you've thought, I have taken breathing for granted all my life. And I can't breathe now, and I really want to breathe. That's the only thing I want. It's just a lungful of air. And I tell you all of that just to say, losing your joy feels like all the air got knocked out of you. When something or a number of things have just begun to suck joy out of you, that's when you really sit there and go, something is wrong. And I don't care about all this other stuff. I'm missing something very vital and important in my life, and it's joy. It's joy. So that's what I want to talk about, because joy should be the trademark of the children of God. We're supposed to be a people who are so enamored of God, who are so blessed by God, who understand our place in God's great kingdom and great vision of the world and history. I know what I know, and I know who I am, and I know who Jesus is, and that gives me a stability, and it gives me a deep, abiding joy in my life, and that should be our trademark. And there are too many Christians walking around with their joy knocked right out of them. No joy. And we need to address that, because why we don't have joy is an important conversation. So that's what we're going to talk about, because I don't want you to take joy for granted, just like breathing. An average person breathes 12 to 20 breaths per minute at rest. That's just at rest. If you exert yourself, that's going to be even more. But suddenly going 1 minute without breathing, that's traumatic. And going in your life without joy is traumatic, and it should be. But I think we have gotten too accustomed, maybe, to not having joy. So sometimes, the lack of joy, there's this thing that's happened that has sucked all the joy out of my life. It's been like a bike crash, There is something that has happened, and it's all of a sudden. And sometimes it's a slow fade of joy, that a circumstance in your life has just been robbing you of this. And there's a misconception we have about what joy is and where joy comes from that causes us to feel like we lost joy. So, we want to come back to this trademark of the children of God. And not just happiness. Happiness can be fleeting. Happiness is based on a circumstance that somehow pleases me. But what if that circumstance changes? Or what if I lose that circumstance? Then that thing that pleased me, that thing that made me happy, is also gone with it. So we can't attach joy with happiness. And it's not just contentment. You might say joy is being content in life. But I'm going to say that it's not just contentment, because that can also kind of lead you to a life of mediocrity. Things are just okay, and I'm content with that. That was never God's plan for his children. His children that he claims are the sons and daughters of the Most High, princes and princesses of the kingdom. Mediocrity was never meant to be part of that. So just being content still isn't a good definition of joy. Joy is something bigger, something more complete than that. So joy in the Hebrew is kara, and it means exultation, delight, gaiety, and gladness. And it sounds like that feels like happiness. Well, there are elements where joy brings happiness. That's why you get confused on those two. But you can't say they're the same thing, because their origins are totally different. And you look at these words and you think this is what God delights in, is seeing his creation, his children in kara, in joy. And so how do I know that joy is our birthright? How do I know that? Because some people say, well, there's some people that just don't have much joy in their life, and so what's wrong with them? And I'm telling you, just from your creation by Almighty God, you were created to be a joyful person. And this is how I know. One, if you ever do a word search in your Bible, or go on to a Bible help tool, and you type in joy, it is all over Old Testament and New Testament. It is all over, especially in the Psalms. And it's really one of the most common themes throughout the Bible. But if you've never looked at Psalm 51, we're going to just take a moment to look at Psalm 51, verse 12. Because we get a deeper understanding of joy and why it's not related to circumstance. And so we read, "Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and grant me a willing spirit to sustain me." Restore to me the joy of your salvation. And David says this so intentfully, restore to me the joy of your salvation. And it clearly indicates that at some point in time, David had joy, but he lost it. Otherwise, he would never use the word restore, right? He didn't say, I've never experienced joy, so give me joy for the first time in my life. That's not what David says. He says, restore unto me this joy of your salvation. And David realized, I've lost something very important in my life. And what I've been feeling lately is this despondency and this hurt and this sadness because of something I've done. And if you want to know the whole story of 51, this all goes back to his great sin with Bathsheba and her husband. All this has transpired, and he's done this out of his own selfish desires and his sinfulness, and a man is dead because of it. And he has caused another to commit adultery as well as himself. And the prophet Nathan comes and has this conversation. He starts by telling him a story, but he doesn't use names. And so he's telling this story and says, what should we do with this person who has done this? And David's, that person is a sinner. And he doesn't get it yet. And finally Nathan looks at him and says, King David, you're the sinner in this story. You are the one who has done this. And you are the one who is suddenly at odds with God. And David, in his realization, he falls to his knees. And in this processing time of repentance and restoration, he writes Psalm 51. And he says this halfway through, Lord, restore to me the joy of your salvation, and grant me a willing spirit to sustain me, to hold me to that path, to keep me in your joy. Rightness with God. Once you've known true joy like this, nothing else is good enough. This is what David experiences. You do realize he's king of Israel. He's got so much gold and so many rooms in his mansion. And he's got all the respect. He's got it all. But then when he lost his joy and his relationship with God, that's he said, nothing else matters. That's how we know. Joy is that important in our life. We aren't supposed to be okay living without joy. And rightness with God is directly connected to our joy. That's what David discovers in this, is where is my joy gone? Well, because of what I've done, it is separated from me from God, and somehow I've lost joy alongside this relationship. So they seem to be deeply connected, directly connected. And when I say rightness with God, I mean words that we use in church like righteousness and holiness, purity. But what I'm talking about is that healthy relationship that we are right with Him, and we talk with Him, and we walk with Him, and we are living in obedience and faithfulness in this great place that we are. And somehow David realizes that my joy is in that, beyond everything else, that these things that might make me happy fleetingly, but my joy is in my right relationship with God. So holding on to past sins and mistakes and failures and resentments and bitterness, holding on to things like this, they suck the joy right out of you because they upset your relationship with God. This is why Jesus wants you to lay down your burdens. He's not looking for a moment of judgment upon you. He's looking to free you so you can grab hold of joy. And so it's a good place to start. If you're missing joy in your life, a good place to start is in this place of lament where David is. Because earlier, 51:10, David says, "Created me a clean heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me." So he says something's got to change internally, not externally. He's not asking God, would you change all my circumstances? Rather, he says, would you start in my heart? Created me a clean heart. Clean this up. Restore me that way. And he knows the place to start is in his heart. And it's this place where my desire for God has changed to desiring other things, other people. That's why he says my heart. Because he says, if I had kept my eyes on you, God, if I had been conscious of just how good you are to me and how much you love me and how much you have given to me, if I had kept my eyes on that, I would not have fallen into all this other stuff. It was when I thought I wasn't happy enough and I had my own desires. And those desires led me to Bathsheba, in this case. He says, man, that had such a ripple effect, but the most damaging was my relationship with God because I've lost joy. And so we ask this question, where did our joy go? Where did our joy go? Now we're going to jump a little forward to John 15, but I know some people might ask it and say, Pastor, sometimes things happen in this world. There are circumstances that are tough. There's some hard things that we've gone through in our life. We've had cancer, or we've had a death, or we've had a major thing that's happened, and you just don't understand. And I'm going to tell you, circumstances can severely affect your happiness. There's no doubt about that. But our joy does not come from circumstances or even from within ourselves. Therefore, it can't be defeated by circumstances or other people. Do you hear me that? So that's the good news. So John 15, verses 4 through 11. Jesus is talking about the vineyard, branches and vines, and we're going to come in on verse 4 here. He says, "Abide in me, and abide in me, and I in you. And as the branch cannot bear fruit of itself until it abides in the vine, so neither can you unless you abide in me." He's going through this whole conversation about this connection, this relationship you're supposed to have with the true vine that sustains you and nourishes you. And he says, "I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him, he bears much fruit." Remember that word, fruit. "For apart from me, you can do nothing. And if anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away as a branch and dries up, and they gather them and they cast them into the fire and they are burned up." And So he's just saying it's useless without the trunk, without the whole root system. It's just all useless, and you're going to wither and die. And I used to wonder, what is he talking about here? What is he talking about? Well, let's continue. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. And he's talking about those deep desires. When you're part of the vine, you know what you desire? Sustenance that comes from the vine, from the roots that bring up the waters and the nutrients. That's what your desire is when you're a branch. That's when you don't desire anything else. You're a branch, or you desire nutrient from that root system. So he says this, my Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. So he's saying that something about what we know, how we know we are followers of Christ, that we're connected with Christ, is that we are bearing the fruit that Christ produces. Okay? And that glorifies the Father. So it says, just as the Father has loved me, I have also loved you. Abide, boy, he uses this word a lot. Abide in my love. And then he says, if you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. And then he says, I'm going to wrap this all up. I'm going to tell you why I'm talking about vines and branches. These things I have spoken to you so that my, what? Joy. These things I have spoken to you so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be made full or complete. That entire conversation somehow is about joy. It's about how we receive joy and how we produce joy. And it's all in our relationship with Christ, who sustains us, not from anything else. It's all from Christ. And this word abide that he uses so often, it means to stay or remain. And the visual picture that they have with the Greek word of this is about the sojourner, who's a wanderer in life and just wanders around. And today's word, you might call him the hobo. You remember the hobos on the trains. And they didn't have a place to say, this is my home. But the sojourner finally finds a place that they say, I'm going to settle down here, and I'm going to start a life here, and I'm going to build a house here, and I'm going to find employment here, and I'm going to become part of this community here, and I'm going to say, this is my home. This is where I abide. And where you abide is part of the definition of who you are. You know this by how we get to know somebody. We say, hi, what's your name? And where'd you grow up? That tells you something. And where do you live today? And that tells you something. Where you abide. That's what that word is trying to mean. And that's what Jesus is saying in his parable is, abide in me. Make your home in this relationship with us. This is your home. This is now what identifies you and feeds you. This is your safe place that you come home to. And this is your castle that protects you. This is the place you abide. And I abide in you, and you abide in me. And this is home now. That's beautiful. And what Jesus is saying is, in this home, you will have joy, and it will be complete. In this place, you will have joy, complete joy. It's a fruit. Jesus says this is the fruit that you will bear. Paul would take this idea and he would expand it and would say, our relationship with God through this Holy Spirit produces fruit in our life. And joy is one of the fruits it produces. Literally, it's a fruit. And that fruit blesses us and it blesses others. So just as we begin our day's praise, I want you to know where joy is. And it's in that relationship with Jesus. I'm going to ask worship team to come up. We're just going to sing.